Hola, buenas tardes. Gracias a todo el mundo por venir. Vamos a dar comienzo a la charla. Recordad que solo se puede salir por esta puerta de allí y solo se puede entrar por la puerta de arriba. No se puede salir por arriba ni entrar por abajo. ¿Vale? Se entra por arriba, se sale por abajo. Espero que os guste mucho la charla y que dé comienzo ya. Muchas gracias.
Hola. Pues yo soy Karin y voy a dar la charla en inglés porque así me entiendes mejor, creo. Al menos puedo hablar mejor en inglés. Okay, so I'm Karin. I'm a professor at the University of Melbourne in the School of Computing and Information Systems. My research is in the area of natural language processing, specifically applied to biomedical texts mostly. And I work in bioinformatics and clinical informatics, and I'm not going to tell you anything more about that today. Because today I'm going to talk to you about an experience that I had recently, which involved penguins and a posse of female scientists. And I hope that you gain some insight into that experience and can draw some learnings from this experience. So this is a chin-strap penguin. It's one of 3 different kinds of penguins that I got to know a little bit on my journey, and I will introduce each one of them to you. Let's start, though, because this is TechFest, let's start with a little bit of tech. So this week we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the web. I don't know if you noticed that. We also had International Women's Day last week, and we have the Climate Change March in schools tomorrow. So this is a really big week, and this week actually represents all of the things I want to talk to you about today. So it's just a coincidence, really, that this talk is happening today and that I had this experience in January and picked this topic to talk to you about. But it's a lucky coincidence. Okay, so what is the World Wide Web? What is the internet, this thing that we're celebrating this week? Well, fundamentally, it's about something called the point-to-point protocol. So one of the key building blocks of the internet is a networking protocol which essentially allows 2 computers to establish an effective communication, to allow transfer of information between 2 points, 2 computers. And really what it does is configure IP addresses. And once the IP addresses have been configured, then the data that needs to be transferred between those computers can begin to be displayed. So it's a very simple protocol that when coupled with other simple protocols, other applications, starts to create something amazing. So we take this one little point-to-point connection and we build another point-to-point connection, and we build more and more point-to-point connections. And what do we get at the end of it? We get the internet. And so from these small networks, we suddenly have this massive network, which allows us to connect people to other people and to information. Something very small and very simple creates something beautiful and something we use every day. And if I can encourage you to take a minute to talk to your neighbor, I'd like you to tell me what you think the internet has done for the world. How has it changed our world? Just spend 30 seconds, a minute, talking to your neighbor.
A commercial business, I don't know, obviously make easier the learning, because now you can learn about any topic since your house, since your home, looking at a video tutorial, for example, I don't know.
Great. So exactly. So those are the things that I was thinking about. What has the internet allowed us to do? It's allowed us essentially to communicate, to exchange information, and to collaborate, to find words, which, as somebody who works on natural language processing, those matter to me a lot. But basically, it's about connection. And so we have this physical connection that happens through the data transfer of the point-to-point protocol, which creates what is really a human connection and gives us access to people all around the world. I'm American. I'm married to a Spaniard. I live in Australia. I can, at any moment, talk to my parents or talk to my husband, no matter where I am or where he is or where they are. That's not something we could do 30 years ago. This is all because of the internet. So from these tiny little connections, we suddenly build big things. So in short, connection is powerful. And I'd like to suggest that maybe that little chat you had with your neighbor was also a little micro connection that maybe made you feel something. So my experience in Antarctica was all about connection. What was it? I went with a program called Homeward Bound. Homeward Bound is a leadership, strategy, and science initiative for women set in Antarctica. So I got on a ship on the 31st of December, New Year's Eve, and I welcomed 2019 on a ship with, 79 other scientists plus 10 staff. And so there were 90 of us on this ship, 90 women. Can you imagine a ship full of women? We call it Lady Boat. And we set sail through the Drake's Passage from Argentina towards Antarctica. Now, the Drake Passage is one of the roughest seas in the world. It's where 3 oceans actually come together. And it's called the Drake Shake. So you go through this passage, and we started down this passage, and we hit it right about the time. Okay, so we welcome New Year's Eve in bed, actually, because the only way to deal with the Drake Shake is to go to bed. All right, so this is my posse. This is the group of women that I went to Antarctica with. And this was actually our very first landing on an island in Antarctica. So after we had crossed the Drake's Passage, we were so happy to be free of the Drake's Passage. It takes about 2.5 days to go through the Drake's Passage. And to finally set foot on firm land again. Tierra firma. This is how happy we were. We made a heart. Okay, so you probably don't believe me, but in fact, that's me. Okay, you probably still don't believe me, but I will prove it to you later, hopefully. So this is us. There's some beautiful rocks in the background with lots of little penguins, which are probably a little bit hard to see because they blend in with the rocks. But that's my posse. Okay, so you're like, what is this word posse? All right, posse. I looked it up. I just typed it into Google like everybody does because I use the internet too, surprisingly. Posse is a group of people who have a common characteristic or occupation. And if we look at the root of the word posse, it comes from a medieval Latin word posse, which means power. And so the word posse really, to me, represents a group of people with a shared interest that comes from power, or that creates power, in the same way that our connection through this point-to-point protocol creates powerful exchange of information. In this case, it's about human connection. So, this posse of women went to Antarctica to connect to nature, to other women who had very similar kind of perspectives, and ultimately to connect with ourselves. And for me, that's really what it was about. This projector is not nearly as good as my screen, but I don't think you can see a picture like this and not feel something. Even if you're a computer geek and you prefer to look at a screen all the time, if you take a look out and you're standing on the deck of a ship and you just look over the edge and you see that, it's amazing. This feeling of the power of nature comes to you. And you realize that that ice has been forming over centuries, maybe over thousands of years, I don't know. Because of course we all know that that is just literally the tip of the iceberg. That most of the iceberg is actually beneath the surface of the water. And what I learned is that icebergs actually rotate and flip. And so different icebergs have different shapes, depending on essentially how much they've melted and how much they've been able to move around. But it's beautiful, and it's very impressive. Now, sadly, we also know, and we can learn on a journey like the one I took, that we have massive melting of these beautiful icebergs happening. And in fact, in the last 5 years, we've seen a 3 millimeter increase in the global sea levels, all due to melting only from Antarctica. And that's been established by research done by NASA that's been tracking how much ice has been melting and how the sea levels have been rising. So on the one hand, we have this beautiful iceberg, and on the other hand, we have the reality of what's happening in Antarctica. This is another view from one of our landings, and that, in fact, is the ship, the Ushuaia, that we lived on for 3 weeks. Incredible, isn't it? I think I'll just stop. I'm not going to say anything. Just look at it. It brings me right back. It also reminds me that that beautiful ocean is absorbing all of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that it's increasingly becoming acidic, that the fish are dying, and that those penguins that are so cute to watch are suffering because they have to go further to find their food because there isn't as much of it. And that means that they're swimming farther away from their chicks. And that means they're at further risk of dying. And sometimes when they come back to land from looking for fish, their babies are gone. And they have to start over. Maybe they have to wait until next year. And you've probably all heard about the Paris Accord. We had Cristiana Figueres, who was the head of the Paris Climate Change Accord, the one who really, really pushed to limit global warming to 2 degrees and to get that consensus. She was on the ship with us. She was one of our staff, one of our faculty. And she was amazing. And she told us why aiming for 2 degrees is actually not good enough. We need to aim for 1.5. And there's some more data here that tells us why. What you see here on the left is every ½ degree change. So darker is bad, right? And so what we see is even at 2 degrees, we have massive disruption. Our corals are dying. They're bleaching, they're dying because of the acidity. We have mangrove forests that are going to be wiped out. Small fisheries are going to be wiped out. There's going to be coastal flooding. There's going to be heat-related death. These beautiful animals, these humpback whales, this pair of them that was swimming together one evening as the sun set for about an hour, again, are going to have trouble finding food. This is all part of a big ecosystem that you really understand when you visit a place like this. But it's not enough to be worried about what's happening in Antarctica. We have to understand that this has implications for all of us. Anybody who's been in Madrid in the last 2 weeks understands that something weird is going on. It's been way too warm. I left the house this morning dressed like this. No sweater, no jacket, just a dress. Okay, I walk really fast, so I got kind of hot. Probably a normal person would say I was underdressed. But honestly, I was fine. I was not cold at all. It's barely even the beginning of spring. In fact, officially, according to the calendar, it's not yet spring. That's not normal. There's something going on. And you can talk about whether or not these are temporary changes. I don't think so. And the data tells us that that's not true. That we're seeing overall changes that result in global temperature increases. These increases affect everything. There's us on a zodiac. So every day to get from the ship onto land, because we tried to have a landing every day. Actually, this day, it wasn't possible. There was too much ice that had been accumulated along the side of where we needed to land. And those little boats, those are called Zodiacs, can't push through ice. They're not strong enough. In fact, probably they'll pop if you try to go through too much ice. And so that day, we couldn't reach the landing site that we were scheduled to arrive at. And so we just took a cruise. We got in the ships and cruised around and looked for things. And we found seals, and of course we found penguins, and we found lots of icebergs, lots of ice. So there's this vicious circle that we're in now. As forests die, they're absorbing less of the carbon in the air. Then it's going to get warmer, and then more forests are going to die. So we have to start thinking about how we can stop this vicious circle. For health, as I said, I work in biomedicine. Health is very strongly connected to climate. And the predictions from the World Health Organization are that in 2030, because of climate change, we're going to start to see an extra 250,000 people dying every year. And mostly those people are going to be the most vulnerable people of our society, which largely are children, elderly people, and women. These are the Gen 2 penguins. Gen 2s have 2 chicks. Some penguins only have 1 chick. So the bigger penguins, emperor penguins and king penguins, which we actually didn't see because they live in a different part of Antarctica, only have 1 chick. But Gen 2 penguins have 2. And this allows them to have a little bit of redundancy in the system, and maybe they'll be a little bit more robust to some of the changes that we're seeing. But they're super cute. And it's really beautiful to see these penguin chicks and understand that they're connecting with each other too. Because to take care of those 2 chicks actually requires 2 parents. One at a time, they alternate. This is completely co-parenting, people. None of this mom does everything stuff. Mom and dad have to share the burden of leaving, going swimming, finding food, and bringing it back. And when dad goes out and collects food and comes back, it's time for mom to go. So mom takes her turn and goes out and comes back. And then dad goes, and then mom goes, and then dad goes, until the chicks can do it themselves. And that takes a while. So they're there, they're protecting their chicks from the cold, they're keeping them warm, they're literally sitting on them. So a lot of times you see just the little head of the chick sticking out from underneath the penguins. Sometimes you see them cuddling like that. Sometimes you just see them lazing about. They're beautiful. The Adelie penguins are further north. They're actually in the South Shetland Islands. So they were the first penguins that we saw. They're very noisy. Very, very noisy. And as you can see, there were a lot of them. And in this particular island, there was no snow anymore. It was just gone. Now, it turns out that the penguins actually don't mind that so much because snow is cold. And when you're lying on the snow, then you feel cold. And so, in fact, in the islands that we went to, or the landings that we went to, where there was a lot of snow, the penguins tended to try to find the rocks and try to stay there. So there are a lot of penguins here because there isn't a lot of snow. And they're able to thrive there. Does anybody know how a penguin swims? No one. Well, that's a fantastic picture that one of my ladyboat mates took of a penguin swimming. But even better, let's watch one swim. They're very, very clumsy. That was not elegant at all. They jump, they porpoise. So if you know porpoises, dolphins, that's exactly how dolphins swim. And so penguins do the same thing. course, we didn't only see penguins, as I said. We also saw seals. We saw 3 different kinds of seals. And I forget which one this is. Not a biologist. So I mentioned that for me, part of the story of going to Antarctica was about connecting to nature. But a probably even bigger part of it was about connecting to the other women on this ship and learning from each other and trying to understand how together we could become a stronger, more powerful unit. It's about that connection. So we spent a lot of time on the ship working on leadership skills. We had a number of different activities. Every day, you think we're on this cruise. Like everybody said to me, oh, you're going on this cruise. How lucky you are. I said, this is not a cruise. This is a work trip. And in fact, we had those landings almost every day, not quite every day. But we also had about 6 to 8 hours, and sometimes even longer, of work to do every day. And we worked on things like our personal strategy map, trying to define what our personal purpose in life was, trying to establish the values that we have, trying to really understand what we're supposed to be doing with our lives, trying to understand how we can work together, not just with our ladyboat friends. I call them my sisters, by the way. After spending 3 weeks on a ship with 80 women, going through a lot of personal introspection, a lot of crying, a lot of confronting the challenges and the things that are going on in our own minds that prevent us from doing the things that we want to do and achieving the things we want to do, you really do feel like you've become family. So we worked on all of those things. We learned how to coach each other. We practiced on each other. We would have very difficult conversations, trying to understand how best to help each other work through the things in our mind. So we were working towards leadership. We're working towards influence. We're working towards establishing connection with each other, with all of you, with the people that we work with every day, and to take that back. Let me show you a little video. These are penguins on what we like to call a penguin highway. So as you notice, penguins are a little clumsy, and it turns out they can't walk very well. They're really fish, right? They really much prefer that porpoising and the swimming that we saw earlier. And so penguins work together to create a route from where they sleep and where their chicks are being raised back to the sea where they need to go to collect their food. Essentially, one penguin starts stepping in one direction and the others follow because it's easier to follow in somebody else's footsteps. They help each other. And everywhere you go, you see these penguin highways. And they're all going back and forth and trying not to hit each other and knock each other over, because once you fall over, it's a little hard to get up, especially on a slippery, snowy hill. And for us, this was a metaphor. By the way, humans not allowed to step in the penguin highways. That would mess it up completely. So we had to really respect their highways and where they chose to go. And we were constantly trying to avoid them, which when they're like this is really hard sometimes. So we also created our own highway because we wanted to avoid walking on more of the land that we were on than we needed to. You know, we wanted to leave as little trace of our presence as possible, although as you can see from all the footsteps, that's pretty hard. And in fact, tourism to Antarctica has increased tremendously in the last 15 years or so. And that is creating its own problems. But there's lots of rules we have to follow. So for instance, every day before we got onto a Zodiac, we had to clean our boots and make sure that we didn't have any residues that we were bringing from the ship to the land. And when we got back, we had to clean them again because we didn't want to take anything from the land back into the ship and start little contaminations. This was a really warm day. Actually, I think that was the same landing, that first landing that we had when we made the heart shape. And as you can see, a lot of people have discarded their jackets because it was that warm. Now, we went in summer, right? January in the southern hemisphere is summertime. That meant that we had about 23 hours of daylight every day. Thankfully, on the ship, we were in a very dark room with a very small porthole and a strong shade. And so we were able to sleep nevertheless. But the sun was really bright. And even if it was relatively cold in the morning or relatively cold on a day that was a bit overcast, which weren't many of our days, I can remember maybe 3 or 4 of the 3 weeks, 3 or 4 days out of the 3 weeks where it was cold, really cold. But most days it was about 3 or 4 degrees in the morning, and then could get warmer than that. 6 or 7 by the time we were walking in full sunlight. That's not very cold if you think about it. I mean, this is Antarctica we're talking about. So as I said, we spend a lot of time on the ship working. And, excuse me, over here, we are working on our personal strategy maps. And all that colored stuff is different ideas that we have about things that we want to achieve in terms of our personal relationships with our family and friends, in terms of ourselves, taking care of ourselves, because you're no good to anybody else unless you're taking care of yourself first. And also in our work context. And for me, one of the hardest things was actually thinking about what I valued and what my goals were in any other context than work. How many people have this problem that when you think about, oh, what do I want to do with my life, you immediately start thinking about work? I want that promotion. I want to publish that next paper. I want to write a program with no bugs. Whatever it is, I think we all tend to do that. And we forget that actually we can't do any of those work things unless we take care of ourselves and we think about what we as individuals really want. For me, this whole process made me realize that I don't spend enough time with my kids. I work too much. I leave the house at 7 and don't come back until 9 sometimes. And I don't take a 2-hour Spanish lunch. I usually eat a sandwich on the run. You probably don't either, but anyway. Oh, you do? Okay. It's sacred. Sacred. The lunch is sacred. No. I am doing that while I'm living here, by the way. It's very healthy. Because I came back and I said, you know what? My kids are only kids once. And if I don't spend time with them now, when am I going to spend time with them? Pretty soon, they're going to be out of the house. My oldest is 18. She's pretty close to out of the house. So thinking about those things and thinking about what you want from yourself and how you want to spend your time helps give you priorities, because we can't do everything. We can't be everything to everyone. There's only 24 hours in the day, and you need to be sleeping for probably 7 of them. Or 6 if you're me, but anyway, close enough. So you need to prioritize, and that means really thinking through what it is that you want from your life. So we went through many, many different processes. This particular process that is happening here was part of actually our preparation for the journeys. We did something called the Lifestyles Inventory, which is an assessment. It's actually a 360-degree assessment. First of all, how we see ourselves according to a number of different dimensions. Second of all, how do other people see us? How do our peers see us? How do our managers see us? How do our direct reports see us? How do they see us? And what you see there on the floor is actually the result of that process. And you basically get scores along different dimensions. And for me, there was a massive discrepancy between how I saw myself and how other people saw me. And it turned out that I was really, really, really hard on myself. And for me, that was part of my personal journey, was recognizing that I have good qualities that I sometimes don't acknowledge that I have. I always focus on the negative. How many of you feel like you do that? Focus on the negative. Take some time and try to think how others might see you. They probably see you as somebody who's willing to take time and have a cup of coffee when they have a problem, who's supportive, who's generous. Those are all positive things. And I realize I'm a perfectionist. I'm a total perfectionist. And on that assessment, I came out, massive perfectionism on my own self-assessment. Guess what? Other people didn't see it that way, because actually what I realized is that perfectionism is negative. Perfectionism means nothing is ever good enough, which means you never finish anything. That's not me. I finish all sorts of things. I get to a point where I was like, good enough, send it. 3 bugs, it's fine, go. The reviewers will hate it, it's okay. We'll fix it when we get it back. So because you're able to balance the time, it's actually not perfectionism. What it is aiming for high standards, which is good. That's a good thing. And so changing that perspective on how we see the things that we're doing can really make a huge difference. This all sounds like pop psychology, right? But, spend 3 weeks asking yourself these questions, thinking about why it is that you're so hard on yourself, what your values are, and you come off that ship really changed. And what we did a lot of was to share stories, to share frustrations, to share experiences, to share moments, to learn from each other. And as I said, it was a very emotional trip. I honestly don't think of myself as a very emotional person. And I have never seen so many grown women crying in my entire life as on that ship. But it was like a catharsis. Everybody was exploring all these things in our minds that we tend to push out of the way because of our to-do list. And we had this space. So people ask me, why do you go to Antarctica? Well, we started off talking about the internet. Guess what? No internet in Antarctica at all. I mean, there was extremely expensive email that you could access, which I decided I wasn't going to do. And I did not have any communication with my family the entire time I was there, which led to some very interesting conversations in preparation, because we actually had to talk about what happened if somebody close to me died while I was on the ship. And I remember my 11-year-old looking at me with this face of like, why are you talking about people dying? And I said, because we have to talk about it, because you have to know what I want to know when I'm on the ship. And I decided I didn't want to know. If somebody was dying, I wanted to know, because then I could say my goodbyes. But if they were dead, I'm stuck on a ship in Antarctica. There's no way to get off of it. You're just going to make me sad for the whole rest of the trip. I might as well wait and be sad when I get off the boat. So that's what we did. We also laughed a lot. So we cried, but we laughed a lot. Here's one funny moment I had when I got stuck in the snow. Well, more precisely, my boot got stuck in the snow. And so there's me. You can't quite see it, but I have one boot on and one sock. And my hand is down in the hole where my boot is, trying to get it out. And I couldn't get it out. It was pretty pathetic. And so I had to be rescued by a knight in shining armor, quite seriously. Leandro, who was one of our crew members, who led our expeditions every day, he came and took my boot, got my boot out. So we were having a blast. And as you can see, lots of laughter. And there's him giving me my boot back. Fantastic. So what I want to tell you is that these ladies now have got my back. They're my posse. They're going to take care of me. In fact, we have this amazing WhatsApp group, which is ridiculous. Every day people are posting, oh, I have this thing that's happening. I don't know how to deal with it. Oh, my boss said this horrible thing to me. Oh, this stranger in a cafe said an awful thing to me. Oh, my kid is having a mental breakdown. All these things. And we're helping each other. And because these women have learned the skills for engaging and communicating and leading and strategizing and prioritizing, now they're going to have your back too. Because these ladies are going to be the people who take our science to the next level and who represent us all. So now we're trying to use the power created by this connection to nature and the connection to each other back at home. So I'd like to suggest to you to think about what impact you have on the people around you. Yes, penguins poop. They poop a lot. The islands are all really smelly. Nobody tells you that. David Attenborough does not tell you this. That's poop. I call that the projectile poop photo. More PPP. So, yeah, we all have an impact on those around us. Apparently, it doesn't bother them to get hit by poop. It would kind of bother me, but anyway. So what can we do? Well, for climate change, there are things we can do. We can start to think about adjusting our habits. We all got a reusable water bottle today. This is so much better than plastic. Use it. It's not that hard. I've been carrying a reusable water bottle around for about, probably 10 years now. I still buy plastic bottles every once in a while, kind of have no choice, but I use a lot less of them. We can think about walking instead of driving. We can think about taking public transport. We can encourage our politicians to invest in infrastructure. We can be, as Christiana would say, stubbornly optimistic. Decide what we want and make it happen. Think about how you shape your environment. What impact do you have, not only on the literal environment, the plastic bottles and the plastic bags, but the people around you? Let me show you how it can go wrong. These are some very noisy, fighting penguins. That is not good leadership. So yes, penguins can have little territorial fights as well. And, you know, when I saw that, I thought, yep, okay, we do these things too. So maybe we shouldn't be. Maybe we're not literally smacking people, but our words can hurt. And our actions can really make people doubt themselves. So think about that before you say something horrible. And maybe try to think about something positive instead. Think about what you can influence. He's just asleep, but anyway. This is the Drake Passage on our way back home. We had 12-meter waves.
What's this wave? Oh my God.
And the boat was going like this. 2 days. That didn't last for the whole 2 days, but yeah. Thankfully, that was behind a window. Okay, so you can't control everything. Start by creating one connection with your neighbor, like you did a few minutes ago, with your colleagues, with your children. And think about how that connection can grow into more connections and grow into something as powerful as our internet. Our internet created connection and collaboration. And that's what our actions can do too. So there's me with a really, really big iceberg. You can't tell, but I don't even know how tall it is. It's super tall. Like much, much, much taller than the boat, like probably 3 boats stacked on top of each other, that tall. Look at my face. No makeup, just happy to be there. So ask yourself, what will you connect with? You don't have to go to Antarctica to connect with things. Try to connect with yourself. Try to connect with the people around you. Try to connect with your goals and your vision. Thank you.
¿Tenéis alguna pregunta?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that this has been a really inspiring talk for me. But I think that it's a personal opinion that you need to be there to feel as you feel and now. I mean, I think the power you convey in your talk, it's probably only possible if you have been there before. That's my opinion.
So the thing is that we all live on the same planet. And, you know, the kinds of feelings that we have, yeah, sure, of course, that connection with the iceberg, you're not going to have unless you have it.
It helps,
right in front of you, for sure. But understanding what's happening there is affecting us here, and that all the little things that we're doing here and now have repercussions down the track. That's something we can all do. And you know what? My husband went over to the park over near, between Leganés and Alcorcón yesterday, and he sent me pictures of ducks. And these ducks are fat and cute, and they're, you know.
Yeah.
And they're going to go away. Or they're going to take over. I don't know, one or the other. But, you know, this nature that's around us, you can appreciate it just by going for a walk in Leganés.
Yeah, it's pretty close, that one. It's a park, well known here. But I feel that we need to connect with the higher levels of politicians, for example, to make a real impact. Because I feel that everybody here knows that it's better to use reusable bottles, for example, as opposed to plastic ones. But I feel that our actions are not enough. So would you recommend this kind of rite of passage trips to be mandatory somewhere in your life? Because I think it's a kind of reset in your core values that should be mandatory somehow.
Yeah.
Especially for people like Trump, for example.
Sure.
So I think that we are not effective if we don't do that in a more massive scale, or at least with selected people that can influence.
Yeah, look, there's all sorts of levels of this, right? Even something as simple as taking a holiday and, you know, resetting in the sense of just getting away from the office and not thinking about work for a few weeks. In Europe, you know, this is something that people do much better than, say, in the United States. In the United States, people only often get 2 weeks of leave a year.
Yeah.
And that's divided over, you know, the whole year. And so they don't even get that time to just have a break. And I find in Australia, that's one thing that's a major cultural difference between Australia and the United States, is that we are forced to take leave, and people expect you to go away and not pay attention to work for a while. And, you know, the message we get from our supervisors, respect the weekend. Don't send email Saturday at 9 p.m. And these are all, you know, these are tiny little things, but they add up, right? And it creates a culture and an environment where we might have an opportunity to kind of reflect from time to time. And one thing that we did, so this was actually a year-long program. We started about a year ahead of time with our leadership activities and science communication and visibility and a whole program of activities. And one of the things that they encouraged us to do was reflective journaling. And I found it really hard to prioritize taking time to sit down and just write. You're not supposed to write about anything, you're just supposed to write. Whatever comes to your mind. I don't know, does anybody do reflective journaling? One person. Very few people do it. And I didn't do it. You know, they're like, oh, do reflective journaling, it'll be so good for you. And I didn't. I started on the ship, and now I'm doing it. Why? Because taking that time away from my to-do list is really important. So yeah, there's all these different levels. I mean, maybe having, I'm on sabbatical here, so like the academic notion of taking a break from your environment and being in a new environment. Of course, as Paloma knows, I'm not doing a very good job of being here. I'm still like in Melbourne thanks to that internet. I have meetings every morning at 6 a.m. and meetings every night at 11 p.m. and I sleep somehow in between. So, I'm not doing a very good job of it, but in theory, the idea is to have a break and that reset. And I agree, yes, it would be wonderful if everybody could have the opportunity. I don't think everybody should go to Antarctica. And in fact, we had a lot of discussion on the ship about whether the program should continue to go to Antarctica. Because we are leaving a human footprint that is not good. And I mean, it's a minimal impact in the broad sense. But for instance, the flights of 90 people to arrive in Ushuaia, Argentina from all over the globe is very, it creates carbon dioxide emissions that are non-trivial. So, but in any case, we have decided that because of the result, so in that case, the end is greater than the means.
So I would like to learn how to keep pushing with this without going to Antarctica. For example, in the park you mentioned, which I visit with my kids, by the way. So the thing is that how to implement all this outside that first contact, impressive contact you
it's
have.
those kids, right? So this is their future. It's all of our future, but it's really their future. And tomorrow, maybe take your kids on the climate change march. I don't even know if one's happening here in Madrid. But, I think getting the kids, and we see, what's her name? That young woman from Greta, is it? Anyway, the young woman who's kind of spearheading the whole climate change thing with kids. Mm-hmm. She speaks very powerfully about how we're ruining her future. And she's right. And so, I think those kinds of grassroots movements are very powerful.
Thanks so much.
Anyone else? We're out of time.
Muchas gracias por todo y espero que lo hayáis disfrutado.